Just a couple of days after the 2016 U.S. presidential election, a journalist, a Russian-American journalist named Masha Gessen, published what was basically an alternate concession speech for Hillary Clinton. Masha Gessen said on election night that same week in November 2016, when it became clear in the wee hours of the morning on election night that Donald Trump was going to win the presidency, Gessen argued that Clinton, instead of giving the speech that she gave, she perhaps should have just said this. And I will warn you, this is a little dark, it is a little stark, but given that she wrote this basically hours after election night, it also feels oddly prescient just a few years down the road now. So here's the alternate concession speech for Hillary Clinton as imagined by Masha Gessen. It starts, "Thank you. Thank you, my friends. Thank you. We have lost. We have lost, and this is the last day of my political career. So I will say what must be said. We are standing at the edge of the abyss. Our political system, our society, our country itself are in greater danger than at any time in the last century and a half. The president-elect has made his intentions clear, and it would be immoral to pretend otherwise. We must band together right now to defend the laws, the institutions, and the ideals on which our country is based." That's not what Hillary Clinton said on election night, but the week of the 2016 election, journalist Masha Gessen, who had spent most of her life in Russia and much of her journalistic career writing about the rise of Vladimir Putin in Russia, she said that or something like that is what Hillary Clinton should have said in the early morning hours of Wednesday, that first week in November when the election results came in. That article by Masha Gessen I think, is still seen as a landmark these 3+ years later. That article is remembered less for that alternate proposed concession speech for Hillary Clinton, calling on the country in that moment to band together to defend our laws and institutions. It's remembered less for that than it is for the set of rules that Masha Gessen went on to lay out for how to survive and preserve your sanity in a country that is shedding its democratic foundations and is shedding the strictures of the rule of law. Rule number 1, first on her list of rules, was the most memorable one, this one that still wakes me up regularly to this day. Rule number 1, quote, "Believe the autocrat. He means what he says. Whenever you find yourself thinking or hear others claiming that he's exaggerating, that's our innate tendency to reach for a rationalization." As an example, Masha Gessen provides this, quote, "Trump has received the support he needed to win and the adulation he craves precisely because of his outrageous threats. Trump rally crowds have chanted, 'Lock her up.' They and he meant every word." Well, fair enough. That is, in fact, the world that we have ended up living in over these past 3.5 years. But over the last 48 hours, as the Justice Department has been thrown into crisis and chaos, and for the first time, we are starting to get resignations on principle from career Justice Department personnel who cannot abide what's being done to the justice system by this president. Over these last 48 hours, rule number 3 for Masha Gessen is sticking with me as well. Quote, "Rule number 3, institutions will not save you. It took Putin a year to take over the Russian media and 4 years to dismantle its electoral system. The Russian judiciary collapsed unnoticed. The capture of institutions in Turkey has been carried out even faster by a man once celebrated as the Democrat to lead Turkey into the European Union. Poland has, in less than a year, undone half the accomplishments of a quarter century in building a constitutional democracy. Of course, the United States has much stronger institutions than Germany did in the 1930s or Russia does today. The problem, however, is that many of these U.S. institutions are enshrined in political culture rather than in law. And all of them depend on the good faith of all actors to fulfill their purpose and uphold the Constitution. Institutions will not save you. They depend on the good faith of the actors within them. Boy, are we living that. So that was Masha Gessen just a couple days after the 2016 election. Not long thereafter, Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny was published shortly after the inauguration. And it followed a similar line of logic, looking at lessons from the collapse of various democracies across Europe over the course of the 20th century, to learn lessons for us, to learn lessons for how to protect our democracy and how to know if we're losing that fight to protect our democracy and what we should do then. Snyder, quote, "The European history of the 20th century shows us that societies can break, democracies can fall, ethics can collapse, and ordinary men can find themselves standing over death pits with guns in their hands." We might be tempted to think that our democratic heritage automatically protects us from such threats. This is a misguided reflex. Americans today are no wiser than the Europeans who saw democracy yield to fascism, Nazism, or communism in the 20th century. Our one advantage is that we might learn from their experience. Now is a good time to do so. And he published this book right at the time of the inauguration of Donald Trump. And then the book, very short book, goes on to lay out 20 lessons from the 20th century for Americans to consider today. And some of these lessons, some of these rules keep me up too. For example, rule number 1 from Timothy Snyder: do not obey in advance. Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want and then offer themselves without being asked. A citizen who adapts this way is teaching power what it can do. I would amend that in our time to say a senator who adapts in this way is effectively teaching power what it can do. There's also rule number 8, which is stand out. Quote, someone has to. It's easy to follow along. It can feel strange to do or say something different, but without that unease, there is no freedom. The moment you set an example, the spell of the status quo is broken and others will follow. Is that true? Here's the one that is sticking with me right now, given what is going on at the Justice Department and the sort of crisis that we have been thrown into in terms of the rule of law in this country over the past 48 hours. It's Snyder's rule number 2. Quote, defend institutions. It is institutions that help us to preserve decency. They need our help as well. Do not speak of our institutions unless you make them yours by acting on their behalf. Institutions do not protect themselves. They fall one after another unless each is defended from the beginning. So choose an institution you care about, a court, a newspaper, a law, a labor union, and take its side. So that's interesting, right? We get this one prescient warning from the Russian-American journalist: institutions will not save you. They will fail. Do not count on them to save you. We get another warning from the eminent historian of 20th century collapse of democratic and rule of law countries. He says, yeah, institutions are important, but institutions do collapse unless each one of us actively defends and saves them from the kinds of pressures they're about to come under. Pick one. Do something to support it. So in the middle of the New Hampshire primary yesterday, right, this very important moment for the Democratic Party trying to pick their nominee to run against Donald Trump, we get this other story, right? This new milestone that we have hit in the Trump administration on rule of law issues. And it is a big enough story that it resulted in split front pages all around the country today. And this was the front page of the New York Times this morning. On the right hand, you see there's the politics. Sanders is winner in New Hampshire. On the left side, in all capital letters, Justice Department acts to ease sentence for Trump ally. 4 U.S. prosecutors quit Stone case after bosses step in to overrule them. All the way across the country, here's the Los Angeles Times. And there again is the picture of Senator Sanders, the triumphant picture. And you see the headline on politics halfway down the front page: Sanders edges Buttigieg in New Hampshire primary. But then right underneath the masthead there at the top, the competing story left 2 columns. Prosecutors quit over bid to lessen Stone's sentence. Here's the Hill newspaper in Washington, D.C. Quote, DOJ in chaos. Here's the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. 4-column headline, all caps, bold headline, right? All 4 prosecutors quit Stone case. Trump tweet spurs concerns of DOJ interference. Here's the headline in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune today. And yes, they've got full coverage of Sanders grabbing the win in New Hampshire. And also on the front page today, hometown Senator Amy Klobuchar surging into 3rd place in New Hampshire. We're going to be speaking live with Senator Klobuchar here in just a moment, right here on this show. But look at what's on top of the whole front page. DOJ revolt over leniency for Trump pal. So we are here Believe them when they say who they are, right? We are at that moment that this president did, in fact, promise during the campaign, right? And everybody said at the time how outrageous it was, how much it crossed a red line for him to say as a candidate that when he's president, he'd instruct his attorney general to prosecute his political opponents. He'd instruct his attorney general to pursue criminal cases on his presidential orders to serve his political needs, punish his enemies, protect his friends. When he said he would do that as a candidate, the outrage. But did you believe him? Well, here we are, right? And all of the alarms are going off about this. This is a front page thing, and it is as serious as you think it is. Here's a former senior Justice Department official who actually served well into the Trump administration. David Laufman was head of the counterintelligence division at the Justice Department, calling this a break glass in case of fire moment. Here's former Attorney General Eric Holder going right there as well. Quote, "Do not underestimate the danger of this situation. The political appointees in the DOJ are involving themselves in an inappropriate way in cases involving political allies of the president." In a statement last night, Attorney General Holder saying, quote, "Actions such as these put at risk the perceived and real neutral enforcement of our laws and ultimately endanger the fabric of our democracy." And equally stunning is, as the Attorney General is intervening to take over these cases of interest to the president, both to help the president's friends and to target the president's perceived enemies, to target anything that poses a perceived threat to the president. Equally stunning, alongside what Bill Barr is doing, is the fact that the Justice Department is now starting to respond. There are now resignations from the Justice Department in protest. 3 line prosecutors working on the Roger Stone case, withdrawing from that case after Barr intervened after the president expressed his displeasure with the recommended sentence that Stone had put forth to the court by these line prosecutors. 3 of them resigning from the case, a 4th not only withdrawing from the case, but resigning from the department altogether. Former Obama White House counsel Bob Bauer today describing that as a, quote, "major event." And for Bob Bauer, the least hyperbolic man on earth, that's like a 10-alarm fire for him to call something a major event. Bob Bauer saying today, quote, "Dramatically forceful responses to Mr. Trump's assault on rule of law norms have been all too rare. A resignation can set off an alarm bell for an institution whose failings an official may be unable to bring to light any other way or as effectively." He says, quote, "It upholds rule of law norms in the very act of signaling that they are failing." They are failing. So like I said, the alarms are ringing. What do alarms do? They're supposed to wake us up. Well, in this case, we are all awake. What do we do now that we're awake? There's no hiding the importance of what's going on here. The country is well aware of what's going on here. All the people in the position to know how dangerous and bad this is have struck the alarm bell, right? And so now what do we do about it? The idea of being a rule of law country is not just about the technocratic prowess of your law enforcement system and your justice system. I mean, that matters, but it is bigger than that. It's also bigger than individual politicians or powerful people being able to get away with stuff unfairly by somehow working the system. Again, that's part of it, but it's not all of it. The reason that people use rule of law countries as a way to define what is not an autocracy, what is not an authoritarian regime, is this bigger sense of what it means to be a rule of law country. I mean, those things matter, but the worst collapse and the most consequential collapse of the capital R rule of capital L law is when the law becomes a tool of the political leader, where the power of the criminal justice system and the law enforcement apparatus of this country is employed for the pleasure and the benefit of a president who is supposed to allow it to operate independently, but we have now crossed the line on that. He told us he would do it. He has now done it. And all of the alarms have sounded. They are ringing incredibly loudly, and we don't know what comes next. But what do we do next? What do we do now that we are awake to what is going on? I mean, diagnosing that the problem exists is not the same as curing the problem. I mean, I think that when all is reasonably well and we're reading dystopian fiction or we're smugly reading history about other countries falling on hard times and losing the rule of law and losing freedom and losing democracy, when we imagine these moments as happening to someone else or happening in fiction, when we imagine What would happen in this country when the things that make us a free country start to collapse, when they erode and crumble and fall away? I think if we're honest, the sort of naive fantasy that most of us have about moments like this, about what it'll be like, is that, good people doing good things will fix it. That smart people in a position to know, being alert to the danger and pointing out that this terrible Rubicon has been crossed, that would somehow be enough to stop us from going any further in that direction and to bring us back to this safe side of it. It'd somehow be enough to call out the danger, to get us to recognize the danger, to make us not go there. Turns out it's not enough. Turns out we still go there. I think we imagine when we tell ourselves optimistic fables about these kinds of things, that in the event that something did go totally wrong and terribly wrong in America, and the president's attorney general started personally intervening in criminal cases to help the president's friends and to gin up investigations into people he wanted targeted for political purposes. In the movie version of things going wrong that way in America, one of the ways we start to pivot toward the inevitable happy ending of that kind of movie is that we think principled people in a position to know what's going wrong and in a position to alert the country about it, they will, say, resign in protest. Sound the alarm that way. That will let everybody know what has happened. And those resignations will have such a dramatic effect that they will catalyze a sort of positive contagion. They'll become a moral beacon. They will set a moral example that other people will step up to, because other people will snap out of whatever torpor or fear they have been in, and they will realize, oh, we don't all have to go along with this. Actually, this is something to save our country that must be stopped. It's time to, lay down on the proverbial gears of this machinery. We all can do something here, and all of us who can must. In the movie version of this, that's how we imagine this goes. Indeed, last night, the former Inspector General of the Justice Department, a man named Michael Bromwich, posted this, what he called a memo to all career Justice Department employees. He was the former Inspector General at the Justice Department, and he says in this note, memo to all career DOJ employees. This is not what you signed up for. The 4 prosecutors who bailed on the Stone case have shown the way. Report all instances of improper political influence and other misdeeds to the Inspector General, who is required to protect your identity. And, Michael Bromwich is in a position to know and to give that kind of advice, having, until recently, been an Inspector General at the Justice Department. But simultaneous to him giving that advice, we've got the news now that one of the people the president is looking to fire right now is the Inspector General of the intelligence community. Because what did he do wrong? Well, he got a whistleblower complaint about malfeasance and indeed what turned out to be illegal actions inside the Trump administration, including by the president. And that whistleblower, seeing those things and deciding to properly follow channels, reported that material to the Inspector General, who is legally obligated to protect that person's anonymity. The Inspector General treated that complaint basically the way the law said he must. He ended up passing it on to Congress, which the law says he must. He really had no authority to do anything else with it. He followed the law and protected the anonymity of that whistleblower. That Inspector General has now got his own head on the block, reportedly, as the president rips these systems out by the root. And as Republican senators hunt the identity of that whistleblower. So here's the question. With these 4 prosecutors stepping up and resigning at the Justice Department over the president reaching into the criminal justice system, reaching into law enforcement to override independent prosecutorial decisions and instead insist on lenience for his friends. And lenience, not incidentally, for people who could potentially testify about the president's own behavior related to the things for which these guys were all charged. Now that we've got these prosecutors' resignations, including one career prosecutor who has resigned entirely from the Justice Department, what if the moral beacon phenomenon here either doesn't work or is overshadowed? What if instead of waking people up and inspiring others to not go along with this dangerous fundamental breach in who we are as a country and how our system works and what the legal system could be perverted for in the hands of an authoritarian, what if instead the example that we're living, the example that's being set by these principled resignations, and also by the career public servants and diplomats who came forward and defied the threats and obeyed the subpoenas and told the truth, what if the example we have of them, the example that's being broadcast to the entire country right now and every day since these people started coming forward, is that when and if you do what is right, when and if you stand up, when and if you simply obey the law and don't go along with something illegal the president wants you to do, what if the example being set by all of these noble actors is that if you do the right thing, if you stand up, if you tell the truth, if you resign in protest to sound the alarm, the result for you is you will be crushed? I mean, what is the example that's been set for the country by what happened to, for example, Alexander Vindman? I mean, right? Colonel Vindman testifies, "Dad, do not worry, I'll be fine for telling the truth." He said in his opening statement of his testimony, "I recognize that my simple act of appearing here today would not be tolerated in many places around the world. In Russia, where his family had emigrated to this country from as refugees, in Russia, my act of expressing concern to the chain of command in an official and private channel would have severe personal and professional repercussions." But he said, here in America, quote, "Dad, do not worry, I will be fine for telling the truth." Well, he is not fine. He has been fired from the White House. He has been marched off the grounds. A relative of his brother, has also been fired from the White House and marched off the White House grounds. Marie Yovanovitch, U.S. ambassador, who was bizarrely and unfairly targeted by the president's allies and by the president himself, lost her job as U.S. ambassador because of it. Her career is now over, too. She is now retired and gone from the State Department, and it is not hard to see why, given what they unleashed on her after her testimony. Ambassador Bill Taylor, who was called out of retirement as basically a favor to the Trump State Department to go fill in for her in Ukraine, he made the mistake of testifying truthfully, too. Now, he's been yanked out of that post as well. I mean, even the ones who might have thought they had some, Trump insurance. Ambassador John Bolton, Trump appointees, national security advisor. He decided he wouldn't testify, told House impeachment investigators no, he wouldn't do it. Decided instead he would write it all in a book. Well, for his trouble, the White House is now saying they will block the publication of his book, and the president is reportedly trying to arrange some sort of convenient criminal prosecution of John Bolton. Ambassador Gordon Sondland. He might have thought he had Trump insurance, bought himself an ambassadorship, a complete diplomatic amateur. Bought himself an ambassadorship by virtue of a $1 million donation to the Trump inaugural. You might think that would be enough to keep this president smiling on you, but no, he's yanked. He's fired as well. The U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., a Trump appointee, a member of the Trump transition team. She apparently did not jump high enough when the president's demands for his friends, Mike Flynn and Roger Stone, came to her door as U.S. attorney in the jurisdiction where they were being prosecuted. She was unceremonially removed from her post as U.S. attorney, promised a different job, and now that job offer has been yanked, too. It took just minutes for the resignation of those 4 prosecutors. Those prosecutors working on the Stone case, who all resigned apparently out of principle over the perversion of that case by the president and Attorney General William Barr. It took all of minutes for the president to start personally attacking them and threatening them as well. Now that they've come forward, what do we expect for them and their families? So what do we do? Because seeing the attacks, seeing the personal threats, seeing the career destruction, the uniform career destruction, and in some cases the personal destruction of people involved in standing up to this president or being involved in investigating this president in any way, I mean, seeing them destroyed, it makes us feel bad for them as human beings, right? Who didn't do anything wrong, who were doing their jobs, who were brave and patriotic in some cases in the face of something very damaging happening to our country that they decided to tell the truth about. It makes us feel bad to see them retaliated against, to see them targeted, to see them hounded, to see their careers ended. But beyond us feeling bad about that, I mean, we as a country, for the health of our country, for the health of our democracy, for our continued existence as a rule of law nation, we need there to continue to be those people, those types of people, to stand up, to let us know what's going on, to continue to signal that it's all right to stand up against it and to stop it, to squawk about what's happening. With each additional person who is demonstrating to the country that when you come out against this president, your life is ruined. We are further hurt as a country in terms of our ability to resist what this president is doing. So it's not about empathy with those individuals, as important as that is. It's not about being nice or being decent toward them, or even recognizing their patriotism. Even if we have none of those feelings, to protect ourselves as a nation, the destruction of them for coming forward is something that can't stand. But what do we do? What can we do to support the brave? Well, let me just end with this, because here's one small way to go about it. Tonight at Georgetown University, Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, whose career was destroyed, who was personally targeted first as part of some scheme, and then it seemed almost for sport. Now, ultimately, it seems like they're making an example of her. Marie Yovanovitch, tonight at Georgetown University, was given an award for excellence in the conduct of diplomacy by the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Georgetown University. This is tonight. Watch what happened in the room there tonight when people saw Ambassador Yovanovitch. And it just kept going and going and going and going. Marie Yovanovitch honored tonight at Georgetown University, while the president and his supporters remain engaged as ever in efforts to destroy her for having had the gall to stand up and testify truthfully about one of the myriad things that has gone dramatically wrong in this administration. Because you can't let people who stand up survive. What kind of example would that set? What can we do as a country to countermand that? What can we do as a country specifically to support the people who do come out and stand up and tell the truth, and if need be, resign? Because there's no line that this president will not cross. I mean, tell me if you can imagine one. Tell me the thing that would be bad for America but good for him, but he wouldn't do it because it'd be bad for the country. What's beyond the pale for him? Seriously. There's nothing he might conceive of as being to his advantage that he would not do to this country to get it. Right? We get that now. Alarm sounded. We're awake. We're at the point, though, where just pointing this out isn't enough. We have to recognize that pointing out where we're at doesn't stop our country from sliding further into a non-rule of law situation. Pointing it out, sounding the alarm, knowing we're there isn't enough. We're there. We now have to plan specifically for how to survive it and how to fight it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.